Intervals, now that we are looking at the quantity and quality, become a little bit more tricky of a situation. So we're going to focus on looking at just basic intervals. We're not going to look at any compound intervals, which is where you would go above an octave, so a ninth, a tenth, an 11th. We're not going to do those here in theory. So we are going to look at what happens when you build a unison, which is just the same note, a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, a seventh, and an octave. So basically the length of one scale. So we've talked about in this lesson now the concept of a major interval, a minor interval, a diminished interval, and an augmented interval. The degree sign is the symbol for diminished. A plus sign is the sign for augmented. And there's also another type of interval called perfect. Okay? So with these and these, when we put them together, it creates two categories. There are the intervals that are perfect, and all of the intervals can be augmented or diminished. So the first set of intervals that are going to either be diminished, perfect, or augmented are the unison, the fourth, the fifth, and the octave. All right? So that describes these intervals. Okay, the next opportunity would be if they were a major or minor interval, and then of course diminished and augmented are still opportunities. And in these, you would have everything else. The second, the third, the sixth, and the seventh. Okay? Whoops, I apologize for that. All right, so that gives you an idea of what intervals options we have, because the answers have to be one of these. In other words, you can't have a major fourth, you can't have a perfect third. These are just not options. The only options for perfect are unison, fourth, fifth, and octave. The only options for minor are second, third, sixth, and seventh. You can't have a minor fifth. All right, so once we're clear with that, then we can start to tackle how to figure out these intervals. We can look at some examples. Coming up, you're going to have an interval ID exercise. So you have two notes. We're always going to ask ourselves, is the top note in the major key of the bottom note? So is an F sharp in the major key of a bottom note? Well, this is where you got to know your key signatures, you got to know your scales. It's really going to be helpful now that we're in intervals. It's so important that you be able to do that. So I need to know, is F sharp in a D major key? Well, I have to think back. What does a D major key have? I go through my circle. It has two sharps. The sharps are F sharp and C sharp. There's one of those notes, F sharp. It is in D. So if I come back here and look for a third, if it is in the major key, then it's major. If it were not, and it were too low by a half step, it would be minor. Too low by a whole step would be diminished. Too high by a half step would be augmented. So that's how you use this chart. So I said F sharp is in the key of D. So that would make it a major third. Okay, here comes the next example. They get harder the larger you get. Is an E sharp in the key of F? Well, if I think through my F key, it's on the flat side, so no, it is definitely not. What note is in the key of F? Well, that would be an E. All right, so an E would be in the key of F major, but I have an E sharp, right? Let me look at that again. Yes, F and E sharp. So I'm dealing with the seventh. Major seventh would be E natural. This interval is too big because the E sharp makes it bigger. So this would be an augmented seventh. So I'm going to come back over here and choose a seventh. Okay. Next interval, E and A sharp. Is A sharp in the key of E? I think through my E scale, I have I can do whole steps and half steps too. E, a whole step up is F sharp, whole step up is G sharp, half step is A. Nope, A should be. So this is not a perfect fourth. A perfect fourth would be an A. This interval has an A sharp, which makes this bigger, so higher than perfect is augmented. So this is an augmented fourth. Okay? And so on and so forth. So when you're looking at intervals, it's important to first set the quantity, which I wasn't doing out loud every single time. So here I have C, and I go up to C. That's an octave. All right. Then you ask yourself, is the top note in the bottom note? Is a C flat in the key of C? No, of course it's not. C is. So C flat is too low. So this is not a perfect octave. This is a diminished octave. Okay. So hopefully this gives you some insight into how to build your intervals. It is critical that you understand how to your major keys and your major scales, and how to take the interval and say, oh, nope, it's too small, so I need to lower it, and then your options are limited. If you lower it from perfect, it's diminished. Okay? If you were to lower it 2 half steps from perfect, it would be doubly diminished or doubly augmented if you raised it. So hopefully this gives you a little bit more insight into the interval.